All right, why don't we go ahead and get started? Sarah, you want to kick us to the next slide, please? Great, thank you. Well, welcome everyone. These are the directions I just gave. My name is Susan Lang, and I'm a consultant. I have a background in workforce development and have been working in the city of Boston for many, many years. So it's so good to see lots of you here with us today. First, we want to do a round of introductions. So if you're just coming in now and you didn't hear the initial instructions, if you could please rename yourself with your first name, your last initial, the name of the organization that you're representing today, and your pronouns, that would be great. All right, next slide, please, Sarah. So to kick us off today with this series is Katie Gall, and Katie is the Deputy Director of Workforce and Policy Development at Boston's Office of Workforce Development. So Katie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Susan, and thank you everybody for joining us today. We are really excited to be kicking off this training series, which is the culmination of several years' work to bring together our homeless services providers and our workforce training providers to build together and learn from each other. Too often we, work with the same populations and we work in tandem, but we might be operating on separate tracks and not coming together. So we're hoping to kind of bring some of that bridge gap to provide better services for the young people that we are seeking to serve. Today's workshop will be the first of many opportunities for youth housing and workforce providers to learn from one another. We'll continue to convene together during the upcoming Boston Youth Services Network meetings. So some of you may be familiar with the Boston Youth Services Network or Bison. It's a monthly meeting of youth workforce development providers to exchange information, share updates, build relationships, and where needed, start joint initiatives. Some of the really important initiatives that have grown out of Bison include identifying new services for referral, connecting youth with emerging programs. It's often a place where people are coming to share resources, share funding opportunities. So we encourage everybody to become a part of that table and participate in those meetings. The June 9th Bison meeting will be dedicated to bringing together staff from housing and workforce. So hopefully everybody will get a chance to join that, and all of the registrants of this workshop will receive an invitation to participate in that meeting. So you'll be getting some follow-up. I believe the meeting is 1 to 2:30 on June 9th and then monthly thereafter. I've always found the meetings to be really enlightening and a great chance for service providers to build a table that serves their needs. So we encourage you all to participate in that. So I'm not going to take up too much more time. I will pass it back to Susan, who I think is going to introduce our next partner here.
Great, thanks, Katie. So we wanted to make sure that we're hearing from our leaders today. As Katie said, this is a terrific opportunity to convene providers who are offering supportive services to young people who are experiencing homelessness, and to providers who are offering workforce development services. So thank you, Katie, for your kickoff. And I'm going to ask Lila Bernstein, who's the Deputy Director for Supportive Housing Services for the city, to say a few words as well. Lila?
Yes, hi, everyone. So my name is Lila Bernstein. I'm the Deputy Director for the Supportive Housing Division, as Susan just said, here at the Mayor's Office of Housing. And we're the lead agency for housing strategies to end homelessness in Boston, including the housing strategies to end homelessness among youth and young adults. And as many of you may know, in spring of 2019, Boston released Rising to the Challenge, which is a collaborative community action plan to prevent and end youth and young adult homelessness in Boston. The plan was the culmination of work for over a year with participation from 240 community members, including youth leaders, and representing over 110 public and private offices and organizations, including many of you or the organizations you work for who are on this call today. And the vision of the plan is to make homelessness among young people in Boston rare, brief, and non-repeating. So I see the work that we're doing here today as a piece of that. Just just to give a little bit more background, overseeing the implementation of the plan is an executive committee made up of stakeholders across the community, including probably many of the organizations that you all work for. And then there's also an implementation committee that's made up of 3 parties. And so those 3 parties are the United Way, they act as a convener, our office, the Mayor's Office of Housing, and my colleague who's also on this call and will be providing some training today, Bia Morera. She leads the housing strategies of the plan, and then also the Mayor's Office of Human Services, our colleague Dana Mendez, who's also here with us today to oversee the services components of the plan. And then just to give you context on the housing resources, you know, due to a large federal grant, as well as the phenomenal leadership of BIA, Boston has significantly, and some city investments, Boston's significantly grown the amount of housing that we have dedicated to youth and young adults experiencing homelessness. And due to the work of your agencies and the housing network that we have in Boston, in 2021, 140 young people exited homelessness to permanent housing, and that's a number that we want to see only grow. But we know that stability is not just about housing, it's also about opportunity, it's about connections, it's about well-being. So I'm really excited about this training series that's looking at this intersection of housing and workforce development. And like I said, the work you all are doing here today is part of the work to achieve the goals in the plan to end homelessness. So grateful for the time you all are spending on this. And thank you for inviting me to be part of today. So I'll hand it back to you, Susan, to move us to the goals and the agenda. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Lila. So thank you to both Katie and Lila for kicking us off today. This, as they both intimated, you know, today is a first convening, and it's part of a larger offering for Rising Together, of a series of webinars and workshops to really bring together the 2 systems, the system of providers serving young people who are experiencing homelessness, and the workforce development provider system, who also serve that same population of young people. And I think, you know, oftentimes we're on separate tracks, and our main goal here is to get some cross-fertilization across those 2 systems, so we can provide ultimately a better safety net for the young people in both those systems. So here's what we're trying to accomplish today. So in the session, you're going to have an opportunity to meet with other providers across those 2 networks. Some of you already know one another, and you may have your natural go-to partners that you already work with across systems, but we really see this as an opportunity to meet some new folks and put some new names and faces together to really start to develop partnerships and build out a network. We're going to explore some models for partnership and network development. We're going to talk a lot about that today. There's a couple of models we're going to lift up and take a look at, and you'll have an opportunity in breakout groups to really roll up your sleeves and work across systems and think strategically together about how to start to work as an aligned network and system. And then lastly, we're going to build out some concrete steps to move this all forward. So, you know, I think we want to make sure that these workshops and webinars are really helpful and important. But even more important is making sure that the relationships that get started here flourish and continue, because it's going to be ultimately in the best interest of our young people. Next. Great. All right, so we're going to kick it off in a second. We're going to do, and I had put in the chat, so if you have your phone next to you, you can go onto your browser and just click in www.mentimeter.com. We're going to create a word cloud in a second. Our agenda, so we're going to identify current practices. You know, what are you all doing in serving unhoused youth and young adults? We're going to ground us in understanding the population, and Bia is going to share some data, and then we're going to talk about both systems, both the homelessness services system and the workforce development system. We're going to spend some time talking about partnerships and networks and the distinction between both of those things. And then we're going to lay a foundation for new ways of working together. and develop some intentional next steps. All right, so if you've opened into your browser, www.mentimeter.com, you log in, it'll ask you for a code. The code you want to enter in is 28224527, and you'll see that on the screen here. And then a question will pop up. And the question is, what do you hope to get from this session? You can put in up to 3 responses. So a word or 2, what are you really hoping to get out of this session? Okay, Sarah, I'm gonna. Great. So connections and resources, network, folks are lifting up. That's what you're hoping to get out of the session, which is great. How to better serve, families, support, knowledge. So the words that are a little bit bigger are ones that have the most responses. So partnership, knowledge, and resources look like what folks are really most interested in for today. So that's great. Community connections, impact, pathway ideas, terrific. So some really good ideas, and the partnership, the resources, and the knowledge and the connections is really what we are hoping that you get out of today. So it seems like our goals are mutually aligned. All right. Did everyone have a chance to put in? It looks like I'll give folks just one more minute in case. Looks like there's still a few responses coming in. All right, and the big themes are still the big themes. So those 4: connection, partnership, resources, and knowledge. Great. Thank you so much. All right, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to have Sarah, who is behind the scenes, lift up the next slide again. Thank you, Sarah. So to ground us for today, we know that young people, we really want to ground ourselves in thinking about young people and thinking about the work that you all are doing, right? So we want to come together in this session to think about the various stakeholders and both the assets that they bring and the challenges that they face when we're doing this work. So for young people, they often show up on the doors of a service organization, and they're looking for a particular service and a strategy to meet their needs. So they might show up on a provider who's offering support around housing, or they may go to a workforce program because they're looking for a job, but oftentimes they're looking for that one service that's going to meet a more immediate need, and providers might not be in a position to provide all the services and supports that a young person needs. So the challenge for them is trying to negotiate multiple systems at the same time, and multiple providers at the same time. Or they may not even know how to access providers who may offer services that could be complementary to the provider that they're working with. For housing providers, I think folks are managing and dealing with really complex needs of youth and young adults, and they're providing a rich array of services. For those of you that are on the call, you know this full well, but might not be able to offer some of the other wraparound supports that young people could really benefit from, such as employability, employment, and training services. And so finding a best fit program for a particular young person to meet their needs around employability and employment might be a tricky proposition. And I think oftentimes we naturally develop some relationships, and you might have some go-to partners, but there may be other providers in the city who could offer a better fit for a particular young person. So that's one of our aims today, is lifting that up and looking at some ways to think more as a network. And for the workforce development system, young people arrive on their doorsteps too, young people who are looking for employment. And they may find in conversations with their participants that they are unhoused, and they're having some challenges around that. And they may not have, again, sort of the most rich array of resources around housing for their participants. Workforce development programs too might have some go-to partners who could help with housing challenges for their population. But again, I think, we want to broaden that network. So we're thinking out of the box and making sure that we're providing for young people the best services that are going to most fit their needs. Sarah? Great. All right, so now we have an opportunity to talk to one another, and we're going to start with a breakout group. And so in just a second, you are going to move into small group conversations. There's two questions we really want you to focus on in your small session. One is, we just walked through the challenges for young people, the challenges for service providers focused on homelessness, and service providers focused on workforce development. But we want to think about, though, the challenges that you as a provider are experiencing and working with young people in your programs, particularly during the pandemic. Like what have you been facing? What is harder? What have you been sort of scratching your head about in terms of working with young people who are experiencing homelessness? That's the first question, just identifying the challenges. And the second question is, what steps have you taken in serving youth and young adults experiencing homelessness to overcome those challenges? So what are the challenges? We want to lift those up. What steps have you taken to support the young people who are coming to you in your programs? In those small groups, we'd like you to pick one person in your group who can help to facilitate. So if you feel like you're getting stuck in the conversation, somebody who can move you along. And if you can have a note taker, because when we come back together to the full group, we want to do a popcorn share out. We want to hear some of the challenges, and we want to hear some of the steps that some of you have taken in order to meet those challenges. Okay, so we will have about 10-12 minutes for that breakout session. Sarah's going to move you into those. Again, focus on those two questions: lifting up the challenges, and what did you do to tackle or overcome those challenges? And we'll see you in a few minutes. Welcome back, everybody. So I had the good fortune of hopping in onto a couple of groups, and I think that there were clearly some themes that got lifted up across the two groups that I was in. But why don't we go ahead? What I would like to do is spend about the next 7 minutes or so hearing from all of you, what you lifted up in your groups. So let's just do a popcorn share out. So how about the first group, someone from the first group, tell us a little bit about the challenges that you're seeing. Yes, during COVID, I think one of the themes that I heard was, yes, there were some additional challenges during COVID, but really stuff that was already happening, and things just got exacerbated. So anybody want to jump in of what your group lifted up as challenges?
I'm not sure which group we were, but we had a lot of issues with access to ways to communicate whether it was Wi-Fi, having phones without cell service, or not having phones at all. Also communication issues. So keeping clients engaged and coming regularly was more of a challenge than usual. There was also a higher amount of people looking for services than usual.
Mhm.
And also the lack of access to in-person meetings often caused a lot of difficulty with building trust and having consistent relationships with clients.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. And are you seeing, so now are programs doing more in-person services than, than you were a year or two ago? And has that shifted again? Anybody?
My
I'm
program
seeing some
definitely is.
sort of, kind of, not really faces. Are folks mostly doing in person? Thumbs up if you're doing in person.
Yeah, at Excel, we're doing fully in person. Unless this, for whatever reason, a person can't come in, we would try to find a way to do remote, but we're mostly 100% in person.
Okay. Okay. All right. So I'm seeing, you can also enter responses in the chat if you'd like. So some folks still doing remote, some in person. Okay. How about another group, some of the challenges?
I can share from my group. I don't know what number we were.
That's okay.
But similar to what Nora said, it was a lot of the connection piece. I know just personally for mine, I work with younger kids. So I'm in a K-5 school. So it's really reliant on the adult in the home. And oh, sorry, there's an outside my school. So if the parent or the adult is working or doesn't have a phone, or similar to what they said, Wi-Fi, that is hard to keep the momentum going of, reconnecting and ensuring that they're reaching out to the services. And similarly in my group too, just relying on tech, and even the ones, it was said too, that like the ones who need the most help are the ones that lack or usually could lack the technology. So how do you connect to the ones when they don't have the way of getting connected? And so, yeah, follow-up momentum, the wait list and backlog of organizations. It seemed like the need outweighed the supply. And so there was, the pandemic with people being home or offices being closed, it just made it more challenging to kind of keep the momentum of like people moving through the processes.
Yeah.
And then you kind of mentioned it too, just identifying what is from the pandemic, what's a pandemic need, and then what was a need before that just got heightened.
Mm-hmm.
If I missed anything, guys, let me know.
That's helpful. Thank you for that, Ashley. How about another group? Anything that we haven't heard about yet? Any other challenges that either there are two other groups?
I don't know. I think that our group was, I don't think we had any other different challenges per se. I think it does come down to kind of, they all fall under this guise of communication and relationship building. Tamisha from Casa Mirna mentioned that, one of the problems that she had was trying to just find spaces for young adults for her youth. And so I guess that goes back to communication as well. Kadan from BPS, he was in a unique situation where they were working with, young people coming back to school and helping them kind of transition back to the classroom. And so, in that sense, they didn't have a lot of community. They didn't have relationships that were in person and things like that. And so they were trying to communicate with those students in a different way to figure out what was going on in the house or what was, and we did have some different solutions that came up. So Tamisha mentioned, that they had a stopgap where they could have for rapid housing, especially for domestic violence, where people could stay in hotels, which was really, really valuable for them. And she also mentioned that they did a lot of work around trying to like changed their intake a little bit so they could mitigate the trauma of domestic violence and like how they talked about that. And then Kadan mentioned that they used a lot, they were able to access vouchers to help students get into, through the Boston Housing Authority. And then they've developed an academic mentoring program to rebuild those relationships. And that's been really successful in gathering information. So.
Great. Thank you for that, Kelly. How about any of the other groups? Any other, anything that you lifted up in terms of some solutions or workarounds for some of the challenges?
Our group didn't go. There was a couple of different things that had come up, some similar with the mental health. Other things that kind of came up was college students that are experiencing homelessness. While they're trying to kind of balance, that the caseload, that there is no in-house services. So most of the times the college students are referred like off campus or are outsourced, and individuals are not able to get those same necessary services like on campus, which would make things a lot easier. Other things came up with immigration status and individuals not able to access proper paperwork, which is a clear barrier to housing. Teen and young adult parents had come up, quarries not being eligible for housing. Again, just getting the necessary paperwork and documentation necessary for housing. Not enough shelter spaces and housing programs for youth, which is, I'm sure we're all experiencing across the board. Limited resources, not enough supply, very high demand. And some of the action steps that we kind of devised coming up are connecting with mental health professionals, enrolling in training programs, employment, programs like RAF, ABCD, transportation. On some occasions, there's gift cards, but again, that's a temporary fix. And also like ESG and emergency, funding and grants. Again, temporary, it will help in the short term, but again, like for long term and for ending homelessness, long way to go.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Candace. Yeah, that I'm just jotting down all that you all are lifting up, and the list of challenges is quite lengthy, right? So we're going to shift gears in just a minute. Any other solutions or workarounds that any of you have figured out during this? I think the challenges were monumental pre-COVID. I think they got exacerbated certainly during COVID. I'm hearing, there's huge need, not enough supply, and then all the other things that you all already lifted up. Any other workarounds or solutions?
I think what I can add, sorry if I'm talking so much and taking all the time.
No.
But in our Brockton site, we actually purchased a hotel and we turned the hotel rooms into SROs. And so that was something that was kind of like a more of immediate fix, because you don't have to wait for a voucher. It was kind of like, if you don't have money, you don't have money. If you do, then we could figure out how to lease up that way. But that was something that had kind of come up, was purchasing kind of these old hotels and converting them into either studios or SROs. And so that was something that could be more people could kind of do that. I mean, right now I'm also working out of a hotel site, as you can see in the back. But again, this is an interim. We're not purchasing this building, but we are having another building that is coming in 2020 that will also house, I believe, 68 individuals. And so that's something that could be helpful as well.
And where will that one be, Candace?
This one is actually in Quincy through Father Bill's. Yep.
And so will those, so 60, if it'll house 68 folks, is there a particular age range? Would it be available to youth and young adults?
Yes, so I'm actually the young adult case manager. So from 18 to 24, so I take all the transitional age youth here, but it's also up to 99. But the youth will also have equal opportunity to access those housing.
Great, that sounds terrific. Thank you for that. Thank you. Anyone else? One last solution? All right. Well, we'll continue to work on this. This has been super helpful. And Candace, thank you for sharing those resources. Those are going to be, I'm sure they will fill up quickly and much, much, much needed for sure. All right, take a deep breath. We're going to shift gears a little bit, and we're going to, now we want to go back into talking about the systems and services that you all represent. We want to talk about both the providers who are supporting young people who are experiencing homelessness, and we're going to talk about the workforce development system and that provider network, just so we level the playing field in terms of our knowledge base here. So we want to frame this out. We're going to take a deeper dive on both those systems, and then we're going to talk about partnership and network development so we can work strategically more together. So I am going to introduce Bia Morera, who's going to talk about the City of Boston's system that's serving young people experiencing homelessness. So Bia, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, Bia Moreira, she, her pronouns with the Mayor's Office of Housing. This will be a very high level, but I'll put in the chat like a 2-pager if you're looking for like specific resources and how to connect young people to resources. This is more like framework data, sort of high level overview. And yeah, you can go to the next slide. So starting with some data, it's young adults for us is 18 to 24, and this is for people in Boston, and we mean Boston like the city of Boston, so not greater Boston, so not Cambridge or Somerville, the city of Boston. In 2021, at one specific day in time, 92 youth and young adults were either in the streets or a shelter system. And we had 119 parenting youth and young adults in our shelter system. So this is not counting like anyone doubled up or couch surfing. And this is not counting so everyone who experienced homelessness that year. It's specifically one day in time. And the reason we do that is because we count that every the specific week in January every year, and everywhere else in the country does the same thing. So it's a good way to measure like homelessness because it's consistent every year. But we can say safely that it's undercounting a lot of people. And you can move to the next slide. Homelessness doesn't, not everyone experiences the same way. So Black and Latinx people are disproportionately impacted by homelessness. So over half, or 51% of youth and adults experiencing homelessness are Black, and almost half are Latinx or Hispanic. A little bit more than a quarter of youth and adults experiencing homelessness are identified as LGBTQ, and they're also more likely to be systems involved, either foster care or juvenile adults or adult system. And this came from a combination of the same data from before, our point in time count, so the city of Boston, and then the Massachusetts youth count. So a little bit is beyond just Boston, but still local, still state data from last year. You can move. So here's like a high level review of our like primary funding sources to end youth and young adult homelessness in the city of Boston. So a lot of it, as you can see, comes from HUD, and HUD is the Federal Department for Housing. And HUD has different sort of funding streams. So COC is like mainly like ending homelessness, generally speaking, for everybody. And we have some funds for that for rapid rehousing, which I'll go over a little bit more, which is a housing program. And we also fund the Youth Action Board, which is a board of youth and young adults with lived experience in homelessness who help us guide programming and make sure that the services are appropriate for young people. Yhtp is sort of the big funding that we got. The line I spoke a little bit, that is dedicated to end youth and adult homelessness across the country, and we got that in 2019. So we fund a lot of sort of housing opportunities to that, rapid rehousing, which I'll go over again, transitional housing to rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, and we funded youth liaison at adult shelter BPHC, so Woods Mullen, Southampton. Then ESGV CV is specifically for COVID, and we fund the rapid rehousing through that. And then the city allocates a lot of money for ending youth homelessness as well, and we fund a lot of rapid rehousing through it. We fund peer navigators at BPS and outside BPS, a Youth Flex Fund that's similar to RAFT, if you know RAFT, or sort of the Office of Housing Stability Funds. It's for people, just strictly funds to either stabilize someone's housing or help someone exit homelessness. And we funded various pilot programs since we got the funding, like motel units for a while. We funded a workforce development program. We funded just different pilots from the last 2 years. And the next slide. You can ask any questions, I think, at the end. So here's some key program types that I talked about in the previous slide. So the first one that we have a lot of is rapid rehousing. And rapid rehousing is short to medium term. So it's usually 2 years. It's a 2-year program usually. And the main components is housing search, case management, and rental assistance / financial assistance. So it's a tenant-based program, and tenant-based means that there is no specific units, like someone was talking about like having specific SRO units for people. Tenant-based means that you have to go and find housing and you become a tenant and you sign your own lease. So that means that like when someone gets rapid housing, it may take a little bit of it may take a little bit for them to actually find housing because they have to find a landlord who's willing to rent to them, etc. But this gives them like housing choice, and there's like pros and cons to that. But that's how rapid housing is set up, and that's the vast majority of the resources that we have. Then there's permanent supportive housing, which is similar, but it's long-term, so there's no time limit. It's only for people who have a disabling condition, versus rapid housing, which is anyone experiencing literal homelessness, which doesn't count people couch surfing or doubled up, but it's like more broad, more low threshold. Permanent supportive housing is a little higher. It's like for people with like more need, and it can be. It doesn't have to be tenant-based, but all the permanent supportive housing programs that we have that are youth dedicated are tenant-based as well. So there is like a lot of housing search on that piece. Yeah. Then we also fund a program that's called Transitional Housing to Rapid Housing. It's pretty similar to rapid housing. The only sort of difference is that before someone gets the voucher, so to speak, the rapid housing voucher, they can go to a transitional housing program if they want to. So if someone really needs a place to stay while they are doing the housing search, because it can take like a couple months, they can go to transitional housing. And right now we only have one program that is like that, and it's through Bridge Over Troubled Waters. So anyone in the transitional housing to rapid can go to the bridge. Then we have the peer navigation program, like I mentioned before, and that doesn't really come with a lot of funds. It's mostly like a case manager or advocate connecting people to resources. And we have one full-time BPS for young adults at BPS. And again, it's still 18 to 24, so not younger than that. But anyone 18 to 24 who's unaccompanied can get like basically an advocate doing housing search. And we have someone who's sort of outside BPS, like anyone can refer, and that person will connect them to rapid housing, permanent housing, any sort of program that they're eligible for, Section 8, etc., anything. And then Youth Flex Fund, again, just financial assistance. It doesn't really come with case manager or advocates, sort of the opposite. It's up to $4,000, and the person can get that for any cost that's associated with housing, even if at first it doesn't seem like it's associated. So we could pay for a car to be fixed if not having your car will mean that you won't be able to get to your job, and you will mean that you won't be able to pay your rent. Like the program could potentially pay for that, as long as the advocate can show a connection. Next slide. Hopefully I'm good on time, but Anna, let me know. Okay. Here's just some high level like core principles of our programs. So the first one is housing first. So housing first means that there's no precondition for any of the programs I'm talking about, besides being 18 to 24 and experiencing homelessness. And there's a condition of like what type of homelessness. Some of those programs are only dedicated for people at our shelter system or outside, so not the wall up couch surfing. But other than that, there's no requisite for like sobriety or being in school or working. It means that like we believe that people need housing first, and then they can work on then they can work on anything they need in their lives. And it means that everyone is ready for housing, that there's no getting ready for housing. Everyone is ready to be housed. And you can go, I think. Then client center, and the bullet points underneath sort of what kind of goes to client center. So all of our services are trauma informed. They follow the positive youth development and follow harm reduction principle. So they're non-judgmental, non-coercive. So there's no requirement for someone to be engaged in the supportive services side if they don't want to be engaged. They build on client strengths. If the young adult is not willing to pursue a specific goal, the case manager won't force them, and they won't terminate them from the program for that reason. So if someone is both in a workforce development program and in a housing program, the housing program will never force them to continue the workforce development program or the education program, which sometimes I think causes friction, but this is sort of how it's set up. Yeah, and in our programs, termination is like a really big deal. HUD has a lot of guidance on that, and it's only extreme cases. And even then, we'll probably try to transfer a person to another program rather than terminate them completely. And you can go to the next slide, which I think might be my last one. Yeah, so last, like another core principle is that it's youth driven. So I mentioned the Youth Action Board that is funded through HUD, and the Youth Action Board, we use their expertise a lot. We want the services and the programs to be to make sense for people experiencing homelessness, and we want their voice and input. So they help us design and evaluate programs. They can, when we fund new rapid rehousing units, for example, we require a young adult with lived experience to be part of their response, that sort of their bid for the funding. And they also are part of their RFP review committee, meaning when we put funding out there and nonprofits apply for it, youth and young adults with lived experience through the Yhtp will be part of that review committee to see like who should be at funding and how much. And here's some examples of some changes that we did in our programs based on the Yhtp's input. We can extend the supportive services beyond the 2 years for rapid rehousing if someone needs. So the guidance is only 2 years, but HUD allows us to have some flexibility if the Youth Action Board asks for it. So this is something that they asked. So someone can continue to have supportive services. So basically like a case manager or an advocate for another year after the rapid ends. And this came because the Youth Action Board asked for it. Similarly, for rental assistance, we can extend in a year beyond the usual 2 years. And clients can leave the program and come back without having to go through the same process that they first went. Just go back to literally the same program if they need to, which is not a usual thing, but we can be flexible if the Youth Action Board asks according to HUD for our youth dedicated programs. So here are some examples where young people with lived experience had a say and helped us change the program. And that's all. I don't know if anyone has any questions. And I'll put the 2-pager in the chat as well, but I can answer any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Bia. That was super helpful. So I think why don't we pause here and see if there are any questions for Bia in particular around housing services before we start talking about workforce development.
I actually wanted to mention something if I could, or ask you to maybe elaborate on it. One of the things, Bia, that you've explained before that was really helpful for me was kind of understanding the difference between youth and young adults who are parenting versus kind of the family housing system, and what services would be appropriate for young people who are parenting versus a young person in a household in the family system.
Yeah, so I guess there are 3 ways that you can think. One is a young person by themselves, unaccompanied, with no kids or not pregnant. Then there is a young person who is either pregnant or parenting, and then a young person who has a guardian or a parent, and they're sort of the dependent. So when I'm talking about youth young adult homelessness, I'm talking about the unaccompanied ones that they're essentially what we would call head of households. And I think everyone uses that across systems. So within that, we do serve young people who are pregnant or parenting, but a lot of our services are more geared towards like single adults in terms of like the budget that we have for housing. So if you're parenting, you probably need a bigger space, basically. And our budget is normally for smaller spaces like rooms or one bedrooms and studios. We do have, we don't exclude anybody, but that's like more how our programs are geared towards. If you're part of a family in Massachusetts, you can access family shelter, and you're not going to access the individual shelter. And in the family shelter, you have an advocate, a case manager who can help with housing search. And then you have programs designed for them. So like Home Base, for example, is one that's very, very similar to Referral Housing. And anyone who's in the family shelter system can access Home Base. So we wouldn't sort of duplicate the same services that the shelter system is providing anyways. A lot of the parents and people who are pregnant who access our resources are not eligible for family shelter, or they've been terminated from family shelter, or they really don't want to go to family shelter. So we try to find like that gap, I guess, and fill that gap. But anyone in the family shelter system, I think their family shelter resources are probably better than our resources that are more geared towards individuals. But we do have parenting and pregnant young people as well in our programs.
Yeah, I actually have a question too. Because and we've talked about this before, that for a lot of workforce development programs, we are serving youth who might be experiencing housing instability, couch surfing. What are the programs that are sort of geared towards sort of that population of youth who are experiencing housing instability, but are not sort of who might not meet the sort of more narrow definition of homelessness?
Yeah, so the peer navigator programs are open to anyone. More people who are couchsurfing doubled up versus unstably housed, and I mean stably housed, like if they just owe rent, I would just send them to the Office of Housing Stability, for example, rather than having them connected to the peer navigator for like long-term housing search. But they could potentially be eligible, so it doesn't have to be someone in the shelter system or outside for the peer navigators. And then similarly for the Youth Flex Fund is open to anyone, double up couchsurfing, unstably housed. That's just like financial assistance. And then the with just for BPS students, so just for people who are enrolled in the BPS system, we have a rapid housing program that is also open to people double up couchsurfing, but that's the only rapid housing program that we have that is open to people who are double up couchsurfing. All the other rapid housing programs we have is for people who are at the shelter or outside. Did I answer the question?
Yes, thank you so much.
I have a question too, Bea. So one of the things that folks lifted up as a challenge is working with young people who might have a CORI, and especially if we're talking, I mean, technically folks don't have a CORI if they're under 17, but those up to age 24 may have a CORI, or young people who, they might not have documentation. So what services can be offered to young people, or what's available for young people who might be in either of those categories?
Yeah, so our programs are open. That's not a requirement. So we do have people in rapid housing or permanent supportive housing or peer navigation, et cetera, who have CORIs, who are undocumented. The sort of trick is, as I said, they're tenant based. So you have to find landlords who are willing to rent to them. I mean, for the query aspect, that can be difficult, but we do talk about different ways of like mitigating that, like having letters of reference, etc. But this is a topic that we do talk about. Like I run a working group with housing providers where they can lift this types of challenges up, and we'll try to troubleshoot. But we do have a lot of people with queries, and they're totally eligible for all programs. It's just the trick is like finding a landlord who's willing to rent to them. And for undocumented young people, it's the same thing. Less of a challenge in finding a landlord maybe, but like paying for rent and becoming independent without the program. But they're eligible for all programs.
Okay. Thank you for that. Other questions that folks have for Bia? Okay. Great. Thank you so much, Bia, for that. I think that was really helpful and lots of information. So you put the information in the chat, right? The slide, so folks can access that information should you need to. Thank you again. All right, we're gonna talk now about the other system that is our focus for today, which is the workforce development system. This is one that is complex. Not that the housing system isn't complex too, but the workforce development system certainly is complex. Sarah, you want to shift to the next slide? All right. Funding for the youth and young adult workforce development system, there are lots of different funding streams that come in to help pay for programming and for services for youth and young adults around workforce development. And when we're talking about workforce development, we're talking about, yes, employment, but we're also talking about employability. So services that get offered to young people to help them get ready to work. And we're going to talk in a little bit about some of the different ways that those services, what those look like and how they get delivered. So we're talking about employment, employability, and basic work readiness. So there are federal dollars. Some of you may have heard the term WIOA, WIOA. It's the Workforce Investment and Opportunity Act. Those are federal dollars that come in, and those dollars get come to the state, and then they get distributed locally. So for the city of Boston is its own workforce area. And so the monies go to the city of Boston to be able to access those services. The dollars get figured out based on the adult unemployment rate. So sometimes it's a system that is more or less rich with resources based on the adult unemployment rate, not on the youth unemployment rate. So those are federal dollars. Then there are state dollars. Some of you may be familiar with the Youth Works program, which is a statewide program. The city of Boston gets actually the largest share of Youth Works dollars, and that's an employability and employment program, yes, in the summer, but also year round, and offers subsidized employment and work readiness for young people. Massachusetts is one of the few states in the country that actually has state dollars designated for a subsidized youth employment program. So we're pretty lucky in Massachusetts to have that. We also, there are dollars that come from private funding. So through foundations that will support some workforce development programming. There are then at the local level, so local programs can have a combination of funding. It could be either some federal funding, some foundation funding, some state funding, or some city funding. Then the programs often get administered at the local level through community-based organizations. So the funding that is behind it, behind the services, young people may be eligible for services and are funded through a particular pot of money based on their eligibility. But most community-based organizations have a blend of funding, and we'll try to fit young people into one of those pots. Young people don't necessarily know what funding stream they're being funded out of, but some of the documentation requirements may be different based on what funding stream is supporting their participation. Next slide. Here's the types of programs and services that get offered through the youth workforce development system. So positive youth development and soft skill development. Oftentimes people talk about soft skills or employability or life skills. These are services that get offered usually through subsidized employment, where the wage is paid through public dollars and not by the employer. Those soft skills or life skills are things like dependability, communication skills, collaboration skills, the things that young people are going to need that will carry them through not just the first job, but their next job, and hopefully onto a career track job. Transitional employment, you may have heard that term before. Transitional employment is subsidized as well. And really, it is set up for young people who may not be ready to go into an unsubsidized position, so an employer-paid employment opportunity. So young people who have greater challenges at a particular moment in time could use the safety net of a transitional employment program. So it offers an opportunity for young people to practice putting into practice those soft skills, showing up, and if they don't show up, sometimes they will get fired from the transitional employment program, but then can go back into the program. It's one that provides an opportunity for young people to have multiple chances without the risk of being permanently fired from an opportunity. So it's about skill building, both in terms of the soft skills and life skills, and sometimes too, adding in some hard skills as well. Secondary education also gets put under the workforce development umbrella for young people in the city of Boston. So alternative high school programming, HiSET or GED are services that also get supported through the funding streams that we just talked a little bit about. If young people are in high school, they can access career exploratory programs or innovation pathways programs. Those are usually with an industry-focused lens. So young people can be in a program that can be focused on healthcare, for example, where their courses in high school are through the lens of a particular industry area. It's a little bit different than a vocational program, but it really, so their English classes would look through a lens of, I'm using healthcare as an example, but it could be advanced manufacturing, it could be technology, things of that nature. But there are specific pathways that give them an opportunity to focus on an area as a way to explore what might be next for them. Pre-apprenticeships are programs that young people can specifically apply to. It has an academic bent to it, and but again has that industry focus. So it's an opportunity for young people, again, to really explore areas that they might be interested in the future. So those are pre-apprenticeship programs. Occupational skills training programs are specifically within an industry area. So young people could do things like a CNA training program, a certified nursing assistant training program, a technology skills training program, things of that nature. Apprenticeships are usually when folks think of apprenticeships, you might think of the trades. So things like carpentry, plumbing, electricians are apprenticeships, but there's been a shift in apprenticeships to add other industries, and it's an opportunity for folks to actually get paid, engage in a particular industry area, and act, and to work along with someone who is skilled and has been in that industry for a long period of time. So there's culinary arts programs, for example, that have moved into doing apprenticeships as well. Whereas, 10 years ago, it would have been really strictly in the trades. Supported employment, oftentimes in housing-based initiatives, supported employment is offered. It's an opportunity for folks who are getting the supports and services who have been experiencing homelessness to move directly into an employment opportunity. And so it's supported in that there's intensive case management and other wraparound services, but they are in an employer paid employment opportunity. And then the last one is post-secondary education or community college programs. These can be either programs that are for credit or non-credit bearing programs, and can include some that are industry specific. So some of the vendors in like the city, so like Eversource was offering a non-credit bearing certificate for folks to move into that industry. They were really experiencing shortages. And so there are opportunities within the community colleges to meet the labor force demand. So those could be programs to access for the service population as well. Next slide. So the critical elements in workforce development for youth and young adults. So, there's a whole workforce development system for adults. And so for the youth system, it used to, we talked about the youth workforce development system would used to go up to age 21. Now it has been increased, certainly with the federal dollars and even with the state dollars, it's going up to age 25. I think what we have learned over time about brain development is that, and what we have seen in terms of the service delivery system, the 18 to 24-year-olds often were not served terrifically well by the youth system or by the adult system. So there's been much more deliberate planning and program redesign to make sure that there are program models that best meet the needs of transition age youth. And so effective practices around workforce development for youth and young adults include the following. So coordinated case management. So, from the homeless service system and from the workforce development system, and making sure that, oftentimes young people get a case manager in each of the programs they might be working with, but having those services coordinated so young people don't fall through the cracks. Foundation skills or soft skills, I talked a little bit about those already. So things like, helping young people to develop those skills so they're showing up on time, they're able to take direction, they have good communication skills, they're dependable. Those are the skills that they're going to need to get a job and keep a job, but also to get onto a career pathway. Those are important all along one's trajectory in life. Strengthening their key academic skills. In the programs, we want to make sure that young people have those core foundation skills, so to set them up for success. And for programs that are doing placements based on where young people may be at any particular moment in time, so to set them up for success rather than failure. So matching them with some skill building and an appropriate work placement. So oftentimes programs will do some testing to understand where young people are in terms of their academic skills so they can make good matches for that moment in time for a work placement. Occupational skills, these are, particularly industry specific. So it might be, if a young person is in a training program around carpentry, it would be, their math skills of measuring, so on and so forth. The work experience itself, so paid work for young people is important in the offerings. And then career planning. I think that we want to make sure in workforce development programming, making sure young people have those soft skills or the critical life skills, having them have work experience is really important. And an employment placement, so they're earning a wage, but also having them engaged in career planning is equally as important. So we want them to move from getting a job to eventually get on a career trajectory, which is going to sustain them over their lifetime, not just for a particular moment in time. Next slide. So this framework is the, this was developed for WIOA, but I think it actually rings true for services writ large. And so these are some of the things that we just talked about in terms of the kinds of services that young people can access and where their entry point might be. So on the left-hand side in the purple, you will see how young people may enter the system in terms of a career pathway model. So they could be a walk-in, it could be somebody who's in high school, an alternative education program, somebody who is under the Department of Transitional Assistance, DYS, VOC rehab system, or in a youth service provider. Oftentimes they go through an assessment process, and then these are the kinds of the services that they can receive throughout. And these are all the things that I just talked about. So in terms of understanding what the flow is and what the services that they can access could look like, this is the basic framework. Theories of change. So we want to talk a little bit about some of the models that I just described, and the three things: transitional employment, the progressive career pathways, and work-first models. And there are, we want to talk about how each of those works. So as you are thinking about serving young people and making good matches about what might be a fit for them. So let's talk a little bit about those. So transitional employment, Sarah. So transitional employment. So subsidized employment. So subsidized employment means the wage is not paid by the employer. It's paid through public dollars or foundation dollars. Young people gain, they get an hourly wage, but it is a lower risk opportunity because it's not paid directly by the employer. Work readiness is offered within transitional employment programs. Some of the things I talked about already in terms of that critical skill set. Oftentimes it's offered within workshops, within transitional employment programs. Sometimes it's front loaded and young people are getting work readiness and then they're going into a work placement, and sometimes it's offered simultaneously. You may hear it also described as learn and earn models. So they are learning and they're developing those skills and they're earning at the same time. The assumptions that folks often will make about the youth and the young adults who are engaged in transitional employment is that they might not be ready for an employer-paid work experience. They need a safety net in order to work. And that they need to focus on skill gain in order to be ready for their next opportunity. And then the theory of change here. So a whole foundation behind transitional employment is that young adults will gain the soft skills such as dependability, and that they will work on eliminating some of the barriers to employment, so they will be ready for their next job. And then ultimately into an unsubsidized job. Okay, next. Work-first models. So work-first models are, also known as supported employment. It provides strong case management to the service population. They're placed in an employment opportunity immediately while working on barrier elimination. So there are some housing services models that use work first within their model itself. The assumptions here are that folks have a desire to work and it supersedes their challenges or the barriers that they may have while they're experiencing homelessness. And skill gain and soft skill acquisition is a focus while they are engaged in paid work. So they could be engaged in workshops as well. They're doing paid work and they're getting intensive case management services. So the theory of change with this model is that youth and young adults will obtain the skills while they're engaged in a work opportunity. And it gives them a chance to have income, which provides them enough stability to get them on stronger footing to maintain their housing. And the last model is progressive career pathways. And this is, we talked a little bit about in terms of young people who might be in, still in high school or in another career exploration program. Progressive career pathways offer an opportunity for folks to engage in career exploration. So it might be things like job shadowships. And there's an emphasis on the soft skill acquisition. Internships or a job, and that could be either subsidized or unsubsidized. And it's always with an industry or a skill focus in these courses. So young people, if they're interested in tech, for example, might be taking some particular courses that are focused on technology while they're also getting soft skill acquisition and have an internship at the same time. The assumptions for this model are it's sequenced and it has progressive offerings for young people. So it is about skill building, and it's one course to a next course to a next course. And the skill acquisition is at the core of this particular model. There is an assumption in some of these career pathways offerings that young people are coming to the table ready, and that they will gain those skills is the theory of change. And they'll be able to move from eliminating their barriers, they will be stabilized, and then they'll get onto a career trajectory. So that was a lot, and it's a really intensive system and a lot to absorb. So I'm going to pause there for a minute to see if what questions there might be. You could put questions in the chat or ask them directly.
I have a question. I know we spoke a lot about like the resources and like the different kind of stages and like supports that are out there for the youth. Do you have like, or does anyone have like a list that provides some of the organizations and what services they do offer? Because a lot of times that's like what it is. I'm just like, okay, well, who can I call to? Because this person, they don't have space. So maybe I can utilize this other option. So I don't know if anyone has that, or if you have something like that that we can kind of refer to that provides like just a list of different agencies that might fall under these different services.
No. So, you know, this series is sponsored by the Office of Workforce Development for the city. There are lists of providers. So I don't know, Sarah or Anna, if you have a list that you could offer up to folks.
Yeah, so if you go to our, the Office of Workforce Development funds a lot of different workforce development training programs. And as Susan described, you know, workforce development covers kind of a broad spectrum of programs. It covers and when we're talking about the youth services, it's especially diverse. You're talking about all kinds of services ranging from career exploration to high set attainment to occupational training programs. So it covers quite a gamut. And we do, we fund about 100 organizations. A lot of those organizations are focused on serving youth or have programs that serve youth. And so we're definitely a connection point for organizations who are interested. If you're a housing organization and you're interested in learning more about options for learning more about youth workforce development programs that you might want to send a young person, you know, we're definitely a resource for that. Also, our website maintains a list of all of the organizations that we currently fund, and that list includes a description of the types of services and programs that we're funding. So I can share that link with you. And then finally, you know, we have the Boston Youth Services Network, Bison, which is a network of youth workforce development providers. It meets monthly, and it brings together providers who are currently receiving funding from our WIOA grant, but also providers who are previous recipients of WIOA, as well as other local youth-focused workforce development funding. So that group meets monthly, and that's a space for providers to share information about, because as everyone knows, programs are sort of evolving, and there's new programs that come up. So it's kind of a space to provide updates between to provide updates about existing services and upcoming programs. Everyone who registered for today's event will receive information about the Bison Network, but we'll also share information with you about where you can find information about workforce development services and programs on our website.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Other questions?
I guess that one question I have is on the housing side, is there, you know, a similar kind of a resource that might exist for workforce development providers who are interested in learning about organizations who are implementing some of the housing services that you fund?
Yeah, we have a few websites. We have the youth page that I can put here, but for ending homelessness, we have a specific ending homelessness website that has like all the nonprofits that we fund and their partners that would like go beyond youth, but includes youth providers as well. And I can put that in there. But if you're someone who's looking more for like how to refer someone or to refer someone, the 2 pages that I put before is probably better than the website, but we have the website as well.
Great. Thank you, Bia. Any other questions on the workforce development system?
I have a question sort of about Boston specifically, because we're such a focus of educational institutions here and higher education. I'm wondering if you've seen ways that sort of impacts the youth and young adult services that are available. Is that an asset? Does that make it more divisive? Is there anything that you've seen kind of as Boston specifically, and that the community here has impacted that resource?
Yeah. I think what we know is that, you know, Boston is really a bifurcated system, right? And city. And, you know, I think if we're talking about the higher education system, lots of folks who are accessing the higher education system are not from Boston. And so young people who are growing up in the city and living in the city, you know, I think we want to make sure that they have rich resources. They often don't have access to, you know, to some of those education systems. I think that, you know, when we're talking about the focused population that's part of our conversation today, is making sure that the systems that are serving them are coming together to provide a stronger safety net. And so, you know, part of what we're going to do in this series is talk about the network and the partnerships to provide that safety net. To eliminate barriers, yes, but we want to make sure that young people are developing the skills to get them on a trajectory so they could access those other systems that they often don't. That answer your question, Anna?
Yeah, thanks. I'm thinking about that lately.
Any other questions? Okay. We're going to take just a quick breather, so you can, take a stretch, get a glass of water, do a bio break. It is just about 11:45. We're going to come back in 10 minutes, so don't log out. You can mute yourself and turn your video off, and we're going to reconvene in 10 minutes. And when we reconvene, we're really going to talk about partnership development and collaboration, because what keeps getting lifted up is we need each other across these two systems to make sure that we're doing the best that we can in providing a safety net for young people, to have them gaining skills, getting access to employment opportunities, and getting housing to ultimately put them on a really positive trajectory. So we will see you at 11:55. All right. So we're at 11:55. We have everybody back. Welcome back. I also would invite you to, if you turn off your or turn on your screen, because we really would like to engage a little bit more in conversation for this next piece. Thank you. All right. Sarah, you want to go ahead and advance the next slide? Great. Okay, so we're going to focus now on collaboration and on partnership. And we have been talking a little bit about that so far this morning, both the workforce development system and how the workforce development programs do or don't engage with the housing programs and vice versa. So we really we're going to lift up a model to explore, and really with the aim of many hands make light work. So I think, was it someone from BPS this morning? Was it Kadan? Do I have the name right? Who was from BPS who was talking about partnering to get housing vouchers for young people? Is Kadan still with us? Kadan Harris, I see. Kadan, are you able to hear us? I thought maybe we could lift up just a little more detail about that, what you're doing and partnering with from BPS. To access housing vouchers. No. Any other of the BPS colleagues who could speak to that?
Hi, my name is Danielle. Kadan is my supervisor, but he can certainly speak much more fluently on our partnerships than myself. But if anyone has specific questions that I might be able to answer, I might be able to jump in. He often, I feel like his, as I'm sure many of you can relate, his phone's ringing usually every other minute. So I'm sure, I know he was logged on earlier. He might've just had to step away for a second.
Yeah, he's still logged on. He might be.
Yeah.
Daniel, maybe if you could, I think it might be helpful just to ground us as we start to talk about partnership. Just tell us a little bit about, how does that work? What does that look like? I mean, you are the education system, right? So, what does that partnership look like? How are you able to access housing vouchers for your young people, for your students?
Yeah, certainly. So, so Kadan and I are in the Department of Opportunity Youth through Boston Public Schools. So we're really kind of the, the central point for all the, the many BPS locations.
Yeah.
So kind of internally, a really big piece of our collaboration and service network, as you have here, is working with the homeless liaisons and family liaisons that are placed at each of the school locations throughout the district. So that's a really big internal piece in terms of collaboration, the referral process that my office is kind of on the receiving end of. So, say you have a homeless liaison or family liaison who is connected with a family who is in need of services of some kind, they'll put in a referral into our office. So under our Department of Opportunity Youth, we have the Homeless Education Resource Network. So that stands for HERN. So, a staff member might put in a HERN referral. And then from that point on, we touch base with the parent, the guardian of the student, if that is appropriate. If not, obviously in this case, as we're talking about youth and young adults today, in some cases we might reach out directly to the young adult themselves. So actually, once we finish up the training today, I have it on my to-do list to reach out to a 17-year-old student who is, currently unsheltered and looking for some different housing resources. So usually in terms of that, we will, on my end, work hand in hand with the liaisons that are at the school, just so, in a way that student is kind of receiving that wraparound support on all ends. So, once we touch base with the student, after the liaison touches base with the student, then we kind of, depending on the situation, obviously each student's situation is unique. So we kind of take it from there in terms of deciding which voucher might be most helpful if as BO was reviewing all the different housing options earlier, certain situations really fit nicely into what certain options a young adult might have. Yep. So I know that's really general just in terms of, stating that every situation is different, but just thinking that, I've worked with some students before that submitting a referral to JRI was really fitting for their situation. But, for another student I worked with, sending them information on rapid rehousing was a lot more fitting for what they were looking for. And, they were looking into, doing the tenant-based options as well. So, yeah, and obviously we're a really big resource just as a school district for so many of our young people who are still receiving an education in the city of Boston. Mm-hmm. And yes, Bia, thank you for mentioning that about JRI, which is a really great organization that we've partnered with. And then just generally in terms of the vouchers, sorry, I'm taking a lot of airtime here all of a sudden.
No, this is great.
What was I going to say? In terms of the vouchers, I'm an intern with BPS this year. So I'm actually sadly finishing up in a few weeks, and I just came on board in mid-September. So my time is very short. But just in the time that, I've been with BPS, it's, certainly fluctuates up and down, as I'm sure a lot of you can relate in your own individual roles. Just in terms of when we receive a bank of vouchers from BHA, or, we partner really closely with Family Aid Boston, which is fantastic. And so, they work closely with us. I was just emailing with the homeless liaison earlier who had submitted a voucher through Family Aid for a family that she was working with. So, they kind of come and go. So as we all know, with waiting lists in our area, we certainly jump on the opportunity for vouchers for families as quickly as we can when they are available. But unfortunately, there's just not enough to go around, but we certainly put them to good use with the families that are able to take advantage of them.
Yeah, that is super helpful. So, one thing, because we're gonna talk a little bit more about a partnership framework, but through the Office of Opportunity Youth, it sounds like you have some good partnerships and relationships with other providers, right? So you're talking about the housing vouchers. You also mentioned JRI and their peer navigation program. How do you know, like, how did those partnerships come to be? Do you know?
That's a good question. Yeah, I feel like from my end, when I came on board in September, it kind of just felt like those had already been established.
Yep.
Which is, I agree, Anna. Thank you. They are such an amazing resource. So Anna mentioned about having school-based liaisons, and that's been, to my understanding, relatively new. I think this is the first academic year that we've had, well, this is a little slightly different, but that we've had social workers employed at every single BPS location, which as a future social worker myself, I'm very excited about, which is just so fantastic and such a great resource, and the school-based liaisons as well. So I'm sorry, I totally lost my train of thought here. In terms of,
no, so my question was, do you know how the partnerships come to be? So, I understand when you came in, a lot of these were in place, although certainly having school liaisons and social workers in the schools feels like that's probably a newer resource, but, how do the partnerships, how do they keep going, right? So you can start a relationship and start a partnership, but it doesn't mean it's necessarily going to flourish. But are there things that you would offer up in terms of what's been really helpful in terms of the connection, the collaboration across partners?
Yeah, I feel like just from my perspective, it seems like, I think we can all relate to just, being very active on our email, on our phone, and, utilizing, platforms such as like this training today as a way to connect with people. I've like jotted down so many different organizations that I had, never even heard of until today, which is really special. I think it's great to be able to utilize these platforms. And I think, having some go-to people, I feel like maybe not necessarily an experience I've had myself, but just, watching Kadan, who I've mentioned as my supervisor, and then my other direct colleague, Isatu, I don't think she's with us today, but just seeing like when a certain case or, young adult situation or family situation comes across their desk, and they're able to kind of put certain pieces together and think like, okay, I'm going to reach out to this exact person at this exact organization, because, they're able to draw upon past experiences that, they know that they've been able to work really well, with an organization or with an individual staff member before. And I think that it really is like the beauty of the collaboration and the service network that we have here in Boston. There are so many organizations, but the Venn diagram of the things that come and that meet in the middle of the ways that we're able to collaborate with each other, even if it might not perfectly sync up, on surface level, you really see the kind of like the underground, workings and, being able to collaborate with each other. So I hope I was able to speak to that a little bit, and obviously plug for the, like I said, the beauty of, having trainings like today and information gathering.
No, that is super duper helpful, and sorry to have put you on the spot.
No,
and
that's totally fine.
I think it's really helpful. So Kadan, I see you have your camera on. Anything you would add? We're just talking about, Danielle was super helpful in framing sort of the relationships and the partnerships and being able to access housing vouchers and supports for students, for young people. And I asked the question about how those partnerships, one, get initiated and how really they get nurtured and fostered. And I don't know if you would have anything you wanted to add.
I think Danielle summed it up nicely. Partnerships are crucial in this work. And for us here at BPS, we appreciate being able to collaborate with external agencies, city agencies, to be able to leverage resources that will benefit students and families. And even within the nonprofit sector as well, with And we have some partnerships there with housing services providers that help to bring, access to resources closer to our families. And we're thankful for that. So we look for those opportunities to partner strategically with other organizations, and be able to, advance the work of having students and families stably housed.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that. Thank you both. So let's look at a model around, and so Sarah, I'm going to ask you to advance the slide on, we're labeling here, and this comes from the Kaiser Permanente Healthcare Network in California, and they outlined the essential elements for collaboration, and I think some of the things that are in these essential elements, Danielle and Kadan, you both lifted some of these things up already. So let's just go through them quickly, and then we're going to go into a next breakout group. So you'll see in here, there are 6 key elements. One is shared purpose. So, getting partners to the table is really important to be able to flesh out a richer array of services for young people, but it can't be one-sided, right? So, folks who are partnering, both sides need to get something out of the partnership. Making sure that the essential people are at the table, intentionally engaging with folks across different sectors and across programs. Providing an adequate structure and support. So, if you're going to collaborate, making sure that you put the pieces in place that have, that positions people to be able to actually do the collaboration. Taking action, so identifying the resources and the way to measure the success in the partnership. Effective leadership. Making sure that, developing a sense of trust across the partnership and distributing power and decision-making responsibility, so folks know what their particular roles are. And then active collaboration. So again, having partnership, in the partnership that folks come together around planning and their shared interest, and making sure that there's enough support in place in order to actually pull it off, right? And so I know that today all of you have lifted up the challenges around that the supply of resources that are out there are not enough to meet the demand. But I think, through partnership, you are able to access more than you would doing it alone. So Sarah, you want to we can go through, I just walked through those 2 things, so we can skip that slide in the next one. Great. So we've been talking a little bit about partnership, but I've also used the term network as well. Does anyone, you could either put in the chat or you can unmute and answer the question. Does anybody know what the distinction is between a partnership and a network? It's not a trick question. And if we were in person, I would have a prize, but sorry, we're not able to do that today.
I'll take a stab at it.
Okay, Kadan.
Suzanne. So I think a network, is comprised of, it's like an ecosystem. You have a bunch of players in there, but the partnership really has defined relationships, specific connections that are somewhat unique to what everybody experiences within the network.
Yeah, pretty close. So partnership it's cooperating with another person or another group or another organization to achieve a common goal, right? So you have partnerships at BPS with providers, and your common goal is to make sure that your students or your young people get housing or get any other number of services that they need in order to be, you know, healthy and housed and thriving, right? So a partnership is you have a common goal and you're working cooperatively for that common goal. A network is a set of relationships that are focused around a common interest, right? And so it's a subtle distinction, but the networks usually involve larger number of organizations that are working to support one another in the work. And it goes beyond collaborating with just one goal in mind. So a network, for example, if we're talking about the workforce development system here and the system that's serving young people who might be experiencing homelessness and in support services, coming together to develop a network would mean it strengthens all programs and all the providers together. And so, yes, you're focused on that goal of providing resources to unhoused young people, but a network would mean it's a broader group working together, and it's for the mutual benefit of all the programs. So, for example, if the network could work collaboratively and approach the legislature for dedicated funding, I'm just making this up as an example, for dedicated funding to expand resources, housing resources for this population of young people, right? And so that would come together. So that's beyond the partnership. The partnership is working together to provide those resources directly to young people. The network, you would come together for the mutual benefit and would support your programs to strengthen the services. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. So really, we're talking about both things today. There was already, I think, what I've heard from, certainly from Danielle and Kadan, thank you so much for your example, is a good example of partnerships. We really are, what we also want to focus on, though, is how we can come together to come together as a network. So Sarah, next slide. You can, okay, so this, so the practical steps in setting up this collaboration, we just talked about a little bit, is, making sure that you're putting systems in place before you're even coming together to set you up for success. So if you're developing a new partnership, that there's a dedicated staff person who has expertise and can develop those relationships to work with other providers, that you're engaging across those systems to be able to share information, and you put those pieces in place in advance of coming together. So it's scheduling regular meetings or communication. So it's not necessarily ad hoc. So when we're talking about the network, we're talking about a really deliberate, putting a deliberate structure in place to set everybody up for success. Next slide. So there's an example from Multnomah County, Oregon, of a network of providers and that's focused on young people who are unhoused. And so it's called the Economic Opportunity Program, Yhtp, and it's an example of a network, and it's coordinated and it's managed by the Workforce Board. But in that network, it includes service providers who are focused on homelessness, but it's also couched within the employment program, and it offers rental assistance to job seekers who are experiencing homelessness. So you have both systems working collaboratively as a network to support the population. Next slide, Sarah. And I talked to these pieces. So there's the cross-system collaboration, and that they're sharing information, they're doing case conferencing, they're making sure that the target population is meeting their goals, they're offering up the rental assistance, and they have job coaches as well. Next slide. All right, so we're gonna we're coming into the home stretch, everybody. So let's try out this concept of partnership. So Sarah, next slide. We're going to do one last breakout group. And what we're going to focus on here is having you just share with folks in your small group any experience you might have in being part of a network, or even if you don't have experience in being part of a network, as I just described it, experience in partnership. What were the benefits of that partnership or network? What were the barriers or challenges? And then what concrete steps can you take toward building a collaborative network of shared services for unhoused youth and young adults? So what was your experience in partnership or in part of a network? What were the benefits and the barriers or the challenges? Because, you know, doing it by yourself sometimes feels a little bit easier. You know, you just go out and try to figure stuff out. It's much harder to do it setting up the partnership, but there are some benefits. So we want to just lift those things up, and then we're going to come back and share those out, much as we did in the first breakout group this morning. So Sarah's going to put you all into a breakout group. We're going to have about 10 minutes. Your experience in a network, what was really positive, what was hard, and what steps do you think this group would need to take to come together as a network? Homelessness service providers, workforce development service providers. Okay, so we have about 10 minutes. It's 12:20. We'll come back at 12:30. We're going to do a share out, and then we'll close our session for today. All right, welcome back, everybody. So we're going to just do a share out from this group, and then we have a couple of just quick housekeeping things to close us out for today. So thank you for sticking with us. So in the groups, I want to just pull out a couple of things that each of the groups lifted up in terms of benefits or barriers or challenges in a network. So anybody can just can throw it out there.
I can start. I'm going to have to, I think, sign off a couple of minutes early due to a medical appointment. But okay. So our group, I don't know, I'm just going to mention a couple of the key points that came up. I'm not sure if they fit neatly into those buckets, but one of the things we talked about, you know, I'm sure probably this came up in every group, is just that often any kinds of connections across organizations with similar values and beliefs and goals often comes down to the relationships between individual people, and you know that can work really well, but then turnover is inevitable, and then it can fall apart because that relationship is no longer there. Yep. And so we were saying, you know, the challenge is creating systems that remain in place despite that turnover. And then the other point that was made that I think resonated with everybody is, or at least with me, is that often the best and most effective networks are focused on a particular common macro goal. So either a funding goal or a legislative goal, where that might not be what you're doing with all of your time all the time, but if you are all working together to create a force and a voice behind one issue that allows you to be recognized and seen in a different way than just one organization coming at that issue, that is an effective use of a network, and sometimes could be more effective and also might only be short term. If it's around a legislative issue or a funding issue, then that often has an end date to it. So it's like a network that's working towards completion of an initiative or a project, and then that's that.
That's really helpful. I think those are really, really important points, right? And so your first point about the, you know, oftentimes partnerships start or networks start and they're really relationship based. And with turnover, and especially, there's been lots of talk about, the Great Resignation and now the Great Reshuffle, and then losing folks, then the whole thing could fall apart. That actually speaks to Steph. You lifted up a really important point. This came up in the group that I was in around, setting up the framework for the group and having, putting a process in place in a way that the group will make decisions and really clear ways that the group will come together in a regular meeting schedule, puts in a system that in theory should, right, in theory should survive the turnover, right? If there's mass turnover, then that's one thing, but losing one person that had that critical relationship, if you have a good framework in place, that would help for that to, for that network to survive. So that was a really important point to lift up. Thank you for that. Anyone else want to weigh in on what your group either lifted up as benefits or challenges?
I can go. I can speak to some of the benefits and some of the experiences that we've had with partnerships in networking. So one of them that had come up was partnered with like employment programs and groups. And it was mentioned that it's super helpful because you're so able to kind of check in on the young adult and the youth to kind of see how they're navigating, how they're doing. And it also just creates that lingering resource and system, that way it's kind of like an in to kind of get more youth in. And as typical programs, if something was successful, well, you're more likely to, recommend someone to kind of go back. That had come up, partnerships with schools. It allows like the schools to see kind of like what's going on and offer direct referrals to certain programs. This eliminates kind of like the backward step for housing, like applying for like affordablehousing.com or CHAMP. Some programs may have accessible vouchers that they're able to just kind of house family right away, can use that rapid rehousing opposed to, again, waiting the years, for a voucher to come up. It also, being linked and partnered with certain housing authorities, when vouchers come up, they can directly reach out to one of the organizations that they're partnered with. Again, not starting from ground zero, you can kind of start like offer the voucher, kind of immediately begin the housing search. And you can have that kind of hand-to-hand guidance, so submitting the RTA, the inspection, whatever documents that individual needs. And it's kind of a smooth process where the individual isn't worried about getting kind of lost in the shuffle because it's a lot happening. So those are some of the benefits that have come out with our experience.
Great. Thank you for that, Candace. Okay. Any other? We'll take one more. Anything else around benefits and or challenges? And then I just want to lift up a couple of things that folks might have identified as next steps for developing a network. Anything we missed in terms of benefits or challenges? Okay, how about concrete next steps? So one of the things, I was in a group and someone said it would be really helpful to have a list of who participated in this group today, and what agency they're representing and what that agency or organization does. So, and contact information, so there's already a list of folks that people could reach out to. That was something that was really, really concrete. Any others? All right, I'm just going to share from my group then. So one other thing that came, someone talked about developing a Venn diagram of where the program, what folks offer and where the programs intersect as a starting point in thinking about the development of a network, which I thought was a really, I like that visual and I like that idea. So that, and it builds off that first idea of who's in this room, in this virtual room with us today? What are folks doing? What is the focus? Where's the overlap? And then start to talk to folks to develop that framework. Any other good ideas that anyone wanted to lift up?
this might be a conversation for another day and maybe not the most immediate, but coming to just a consensus around what the goals of this space are, the unique values of this space as opposed to other spaces that we're in. You know, what is the value of this space in relation to the work that we're already doing and the work that we want to push forward, and really getting on the same page around intent and some of those pieces.
Yeah, Dana, thank you for that. That's a really important point. And if you think about the, the circle from the Kaiser Permanente that talks about shared purpose as a starting point for developing a network, I think you're lifting it up. That's absolutely right, right? So coming together to understand what our shared purpose is, and agreeing upon that purpose and how the group will operate is, certainly in terms of best practice of developing a network. So thank you for lifting that up. I think that's great. All right. Thank you all for that. So some really, really good ideas. I think there's a lot that we've been able to pull out today. And a really good first convening of this group. So Sarah, you want to switch to the last slide? Thank you for that. We want to be respectful of time and all that you've given today. You've spent a good chunk with us. So, I speak for, myself and certainly for the city, both the housing department and for the Office of Workforce Development for spending time with us. We do have a survey that is in the chat, and we would love if you could do that survey before you exit with us. I also wanted to let folks know that 2 weeks from today, on April 26th, is the second topic in this series. Some of you may have signed up for that already, but we're talking about a shared framework for case management and case conferencing. And we're going to build off of the conversation we had today about developing a collaborative network. So if you haven't signed up for that and you want to, you can register for that session, and the link is right there. So we're going to close for today. We really want to thank you again, and we really want to get your feedback because we want these sessions to be useful to you. So we would appreciate if you took the survey. It will take you just a couple of minutes. All right, so if you can click on that link and do that survey, and hopefully we will see you all again. Thank you so much for your time.